Logan Pierce thought he was just conducting another routine sweep of the abandoned compound with his canine partner Rex when they heard the whisper from the tree line. A young girl emerged from the shadows, clutching a weathered notebook that would shatter everything Logan believed about his best friend's disappearance 5 years ago. What she revealed next would force Logan to question everything he knew about loyalty, sacrifice, and the price of keeping secrets in a war zone where nothing is as it seems. Before we carry on, please hit the subscribe button to make my day, and let me know where you are watching from in the comments. The morning air hung thick with humidity as infantryman Logan Pierce adjusted his tactical vest and glanced down at Rex, his German Shepherd partner of 3 years. The compound ahead looked abandoned, its concrete walls pockmarked with bullet holes and streaked with rust stains that could have been anything. Logan had seen enough of these places to know that appearances meant nothing. Empty buildings had teeth, and they bit when you least expected it. "What do you think, boy?" Logan whispered, his voice barely carrying over the distant sound of helicopters circling somewhere beyond the hills. Rex's ears twitched, and his dark eyes fixed on the structure with an intensity that made Logan's pulse quicken. The dog had saved his life more times than he could count, detecting IEDs, finding hidden enemies, and sensing danger long before Logan's human instincts caught up. If Rex was alert, there was a reason. Logan keyed his radio. "Bass, this is Pierce. Beginning sweep of structure Alpha 7. Rex is showing interest. Proceeding with caution." The crackling response came through his earpiece. "Copy, Pierce. Team Bravo is 15 minutes out if you need backup. Keep us posted." 15 minutes felt like a lifetime in this business. Logan had learned that the difference between coming home and becoming a casualty often measured in seconds, not minutes. He signaled Rex forward with a hand gesture, and together they approached the compound's main entrance. The metal door hung askew on its hinges, revealing glimpses of darkness beyond. Rex suddenly froze, his hackles rising as he turned toward the dense forest that bordered the compound's eastern wall. A low whine escaped his throat, not the aggressive warning Logan expected, but something else entirely. Something almost mournful. "Easy, Rex," Logan murmured, following his partner's gaze into the shadowy spaces between the trees. At first, he saw nothing but the usual tangle of vegetation and filtered sunlight. Then movement caught his eye, barely perceptible, like a breath of wind disturbing the leaves. That's when he heard it. "You finally came." The words drifted through the air so quietly that Logan almost convinced himself he'd imagined them. Almost. Rex's ears swiveled toward the sound, confirming what Logan's mind wanted to reject. Someone was out there, watching them. Logan's hand instinctively moved to his weapon as he scanned the tree line more carefully. His training screamed at him to call for backup, to treat this as a potential ambush. But something in those 3 words held him back. The voice had been young, female, and filled with something that sounded dangerously close to relief. "Hello?" Logan called out, his voice carrying farther than he'd intended. "Is someone there? I'm with the U.S. Army. If you need help, show yourself." For several heartbeats, nothing happened. Then the underbrush parted, and a figure stepped into view. Logan's breath caught in his throat. It was a girl, maybe 10 or 11 years old, with tangled dark hair and clothes that had seen better months. What stopped Logan's heart wasn't her appearance, though. It was what she carried in her small hands. A notebook, leather-bound, worn to softness by countless handlings, and unmistakably familiar. Logan's world tilted sideways as memories crashed over him like a rogue wave. That notebook belonged to Marcus Chen, his closest friend and battle brother who had vanished during a reconnaissance mission 5 years ago. Marcus never went anywhere without that notebook, filling it with sketches, observations, and letters he never sent to his sister back home. Logan had searched for weeks, following every lead and chasing every rumor. But Marcus had simply disappeared into the Afghanistan mountains like smoke. "Where did you get that?" Logan's voice came out rougher than he intended, causing Rex to glance up at him with concern. The dog sensed the shift in his partner's emotional state and moved closer, pressing against Logan's leg in a gesture of support. The girl took a hesitant step forward, clutching the notebook against her chest. When she spoke, her English carried the lilting accent of the local dialect. but her words were clear and carefully chosen. "The soldier gave it to me before the men took him away. He said someone would come looking for him someday. He said they would have a dog like this one." She pointed at Rex with a trembling finger. He drew pictures of the dog in his book. Logan's knees nearly gave out. Marcus had talked about getting a canine partner someday, had even sketched imaginary dogs in the margins of his mission reports. But that had been years ago, long before Logan had been assigned Rex. How could this girl know about details that hadn't even happened yet when Marcus disappeared? "What soldier?" Logan asked, though part of him already knew the answer. "When did this happen? Where did they take him?" The girl's eyes darted nervously between Logan and the forest behind her, as if she expected someone to emerge from the shadows at any moment. "I cannot stay long. They watch the compound sometimes. But the soldier, your friend, he is alive, or he was when I saw him last." The world seemed to stop rotating on its axis. Alive. Marcus was alive. Logan had never allowed himself to fully believe his friend was dead, but hearing it confirmed by this strange child felt like being struck by lightning. Rex whined softly and nudged Logan's hand, sensing his partner's distress. "When?" Logan managed to ask. "When did you see him last?" "2 moons ago," the girl replied, using the traditional way of marking time that Logan had learned to interpret as roughly 2 months. "The men who took him, they move him sometimes. Different places. But I know where they keep him now." Logan's mind raced through the implications. If Marcus was alive after all these years, it meant he'd either been captured and held prisoner, or worse, that he'd somehow been turned. The thought of his friend collaborating with enemy forces made Logan's stomach churn, but he pushed the suspicion aside. Marcus Chen was many things, but a traitor wasn't one of them. "Why didn't you tell anyone before now?" Logan asked, studying the girl's face for signs of deception. In his experience, children were either completely honest or masterful liars, with very little middle ground. "Who would believe a village girl?" she replied with a wisdom that seemed too old for her years. "The soldiers who came before, they asked questions but did not listen to answers. They wanted to know about weapons and bombs, not missing men. But you were different. You have the same eyes as the soldier in the book." She held out the notebook with both hands, offering it to Logan like a sacred relic. He hesitated before taking it, knowing that whatever he found inside would change everything. The leather was warm from the girl's touch, and softer than he remembered. With trembling fingers, he opened to the first page. Marcus's handwriting stared back at him, as familiar as his own reflection. The first entry was dated 5 years ago, just days before Marcus's patrol had gone missing. Logan's vision blurred as he read his friend's words, written in the precise script that had earned Marcus's top marks in every written exam they'd taken together. "Day 847 of deployment. Logan thinks I'm crazy for keeping this journal, but some things need to be remembered exactly as they happened, not as we wish they had. Today we got word about a possible high-value target in the mountains. Intel says it's a Taliban commander, but something feels off about the whole operation. Too clean, too convenient. I've learned to trust my gut out here. And my gut says this is a trap." Logan's hands shook as he turned the page. The next entry was shorter, more urgent. "Day 848. Logan tried to volunteer for the recon mission, but I convinced the CO to let me take it instead. Some chances you don't let your friends take. If something happens to me, I need Bash. Logan to know that whatever choices I make, they're mine to make. He's got too much good in him to carry my decisions." The entry stopped there, but the notebook was far from empty. The remaining pages contained sketches, maps, and observations written in a different hand entirely. The writing was still Marcus's, but it had evolved, become more angular and urgent. These weren't the casual observations of a soldier on deployment. These were the desperate notes of someone planning an escape. Logan looked up to find the girl watching him with knowing eyes. "He wrote about you," she said quietly. "Every day at first, then less as time passed. But he never forgot. He made me promise that if soldiers ever came back to this place, I would find the one with kind eyes and give him the book." "What's your name?" Logan asked, his voice thick with emotion he couldn't quite identify. "Amara," she replied. The soldier called me his little guardian. He said I reminded him of his sister. Marcus had talked about his sister Sarah constantly during their deployment. She was 3 years younger than him and studying to become a teacher. Logan had never met her, but he felt like he knew her through Marcus's stories. If this girl reminded Marcus of Sarah, it explained the obvious care he'd taken to protect her. Amara, Logan said carefully, I need you to tell me everything. Where is he? Who has him? How do you know he's still alive? The girl glanced nervously toward the compound, then back at the forest. There is a place in the mountains, maybe 2 hours' walk from here. It looks like old ruins, but underneath there are rooms, tunnels. The men who took your friend, they use it as a prison for special captives. People they want information from, or people they plan to trade. Logan's tactical mind immediately began processing this information. A hidden facility, 2 hours on foot, designed for holding high-value prisoners. It sounded like exactly the kind of place intelligence agencies had been searching for throughout the region. If Marcus was there, he wasn't just a prisoner. He was being held for a specific purpose. How many guards? Logan asked, slipping into operational mode despite the emotional turmoil churning in his chest. Usually 6 or 7, Amara replied without hesitation, but sometimes more when they bring new prisoners, or when the important men come to visit. They change the guards every few weeks, but the pattern is always the same. They are most relaxed in the early morning, just before dawn. Logan was impressed by the girl's observational skills. She'd obviously been watching the facility for some time, learning its routines and vulnerabilities. Why haven't you tried to help him escape? Amara's expression hardened. I tried once. They caught me and threatened to hurt him if I came back. But they also said they would hurt him if anything happened to me. So I stayed away, but I kept watching. Waiting for the right moment, the right person. The weight of responsibility settled on Logan's shoulders like a lead blanket. This girl had been carrying the burden of Marcus's captivity alone for months, maybe longer. She'd risked her own safety to bring him this information, trusting that he would know what to do with it. Rex suddenly lifted his head, ears pricked toward the compound. A low growl rumbled in his chest, the kind of warning that meant immediate danger. Logan's training kicked in, and he grabbed Amara's arm, pulling her toward the cover of the nearest tree. What is it, Rex? Logan whispered, though he was already scanning the area for threats. The sound of engines reached them a moment later, growing louder as vehicles approached the compound from the west. Logan counted at least 3, possibly 4 different engines, all moving at tactical speed. This wasn't a scheduled patrol or supply run. This was something else. We need to move, Logan said urgently, but Amara was already ahead of him, melting back into the forest with the practiced ease of someone who'd spent years avoiding detection. Logan and Rex followed, using the dense vegetation to mask their retreat, from their concealed position 50 yards away. Logan watched as 4 black SUVs pulled up to the compound. Men in civilian clothes but carrying military-grade weapons emerged from the vehicles and began setting up a perimeter. These weren't local forces or regular military. The coordination and equipment suggested private contractors or special operations. Logan keyed his radio, keeping his voice low. Bass, this is Pierce. I have eyes on 4 unknown vehicles at Structure Alpha 7. Armed personnel deploying, requesting immediate backup. Static answered him. Logan tried again, adjusting frequencies, but got the same result. Either his radio was malfunctioning, or something was jamming communications in the area. Given the timing of the arrival, jamming seemed more likely. Amara appeared at his elbow like a ghost, her movements so quiet that even Rex hadn't detected her. Approach. Those are the men who took your friend, she whispered. They come here sometimes to meet with others. I think they know you were asking questions. Logan's blood ran cold. If these people had been monitoring communications or had sources within the military structure, his inquiry about the compound could have triggered this response. He'd walked Rex directly into a trap, and worse, he'd put Amara in danger as well. We need to get out of here, Logan said, already calculating the best route back to base. But Amara caught his arm, her small fingers surprisingly strong. No, she said firmly. This is our chance. When they meet here, the mountain prison is less guarded. Only 2 or 3 men, instead of 6. If we go now, we can reach your friend before they return. Logan stared at the girl, torn between admiration and horror at her suggestion. She was proposing they use this distraction to attempt a rescue mission with no backup, no support, and no guarantee that Marcus was even still alive. It was exactly the kind of desperate gamble that got soldiers killed. It was also exactly what Marcus would have done if their positions were reversed. Logan looked down at Rex, who was watching him with the patient intelligence that had made their partnership so effective. The dog seemed to understand that a decision was being made, one that would determine the course of their immediate future. Rex had never let Logan down, and Logan had never asked him to take a risk that wasn't worth the potential gain. Was Marcus worth it? The question answered itself before Logan could fully form it. Marcus had volunteered for the mission that led to his capture, specifically to keep Logan safe. The least Logan could do was return the favor. How long do these meetings usually last? Logan asked, his mind already shifting from retreat to assault planning. 2 hours, sometimes 3, Amara replied. Long enough for us to reach the prison, free your friend, and get away before they return. Logan nodded grimly. It was a tight timeline, but workable if everything went perfectly. In his experience, nothing ever went perfectly, which meant they needed contingency plans and a healthy dose of luck. All right, he said, making the decision that would haunt his dreams for years to come, regardless of how it turned out. Show me the way. Amara's face lit up with fierce joy, transforming her from a scared child into something altogether more dangerous. She'd been waiting for this moment, planning for it, dreaming of it. Now that it was finally happening, her true nature emerged. This wasn't just a village girl who'd stumbled across information about a missing soldier. This was someone with a personal stake in the outcome. There is something else you should know, Amara said, as she led them deeper into the forest, following paths that existed more in memory than reality. Your friend, he is not the only prisoner. There are others. Some have been there even longer than him. Logan's tactical calculations became exponentially more complex. A simple extraction of one man was challenging enough, liberating multiple prisoners, while evading heavily armed guards and racing against a strict timeline bordered on impossible. But if there were other Americans being held captive, Logan couldn't in good conscience leave them behind. How many others? He asked, stepping over a fallen log that Rex bounded across with ease. I am not certain, Amara admitted. The prison has many cells, but most are empty. I have seen maybe 4 or 5 different faces over the months. Some disappear and never return. Others arrive to replace them. Your friend has been there the longest of any I have seen. The implication was clear and chilling. This wasn't a simple prisoner of war situation. This was some kind of processing facility, where captives were held temporarily before being moved elsewhere or disposed of entirely. Marcus had survived longer than most, which suggested either unusual luck or that his captors had specific plans for him. They traveled in silence for the next hour, following game trails and creek beds that provided natural concealment from aerial observation. Logan was impressed by Amara's knowledge of the terrain and her ability to move without leaving obvious tracks. She'd clearly spent considerable time in these mountains, learning their secrets and hidden passages. Rex seemed to approve of their guide as well, showing none of the suspicion he typically displayed around strangers. Dogs were excellent judges of character, and Rex's calm acceptance of Amara went a long way toward easing Logan's concerns about trusting her. Still, Logan kept his weapon ready and his senses alert. Trust was earned in increments, and he hadn't known this girl long enough to stake his life on her intentions. As they climbed higher into the mountains, the forest began to change character. The trees grew sparser, and rocky outcroppings became more common. The air grew thinner and cooler, carrying scents of pine and snow from the peaks above. Logan's lungs worked harder with each step, but Amara seemed unaffected by the altitude. This was her natural environment, as familiar to her as Logan's military base was to him. "We are close," Amara whispered, pointing toward a cluster of weathered stone structures visible through the trees ahead. The entrance to the real prison is hidden behind the largest ruin. There will be guards, but they stay mostly inside during the day. Logan studied the ruins through his binoculars, noting the strategic positioning and natural defensive advantages. Whoever had chosen this location understood military tactics and the value of controlling high ground. The ancient structures provided excellent cover, while commanding views of all approach routes. It was a fortress disguised as archaeology. "Where exactly is the entrance?" Logan asked, adjusting the focus to get a better look at the details. "See the wall with the carved figures?" Amara pointed to a section of stonework that featured weathered reliefs depicting some long-forgotten battle. "Behind that wall is a modern door, very heavy, with electronic locks. The guards have devices that open it, but there is also a keypad." Logan lowered his binoculars and looked at Amara with new respect. She'd conducted a thorough reconnaissance of the facility, gathering intelligence that most trained soldiers would be proud to collect. Her knowledge of electronic locks and keypads suggested she'd been closer to the installation than a casual observer would manage. "Do you know the code for the keypad?" Logan asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. Amara's expression grew complicated, a mixture of pride and embarrassment crossing her features. "I watched them enter it many times from hiding. Numbers are the same in any language, but I cannot read the letters, if there are letters." Logan felt a surge of admiration for this remarkable child. She'd been conducting her own surveillance operation for months, gathering actionable intelligence through patience and careful observation. Her information was better than anything Logan had access to through official channels. "The numbers," Logan prompted gently. "Do you remember them?" 4, 7, 7, 3, 1, 8. Amara recited without hesitation. "Always the same, morning and night." Logan committed the sequence to memory, running through it several times to ensure accuracy. 6 digits suggested either a date or a reference number of some kind. The repetitive sevens might indicate a pattern or personal significance to whoever had chosen the code. Not the most secure system, but adequate for a facility that relied primarily on secrecy rather than obvious defenses. Rex suddenly tensed, his attention focused on something Logan couldn't detect. The dog's exceptional senses often provided the first warning of approaching danger, and Logan had learned to trust those instincts completely. He signaled for silence and waited, watching Rex's body language for clues about the nature of the threat. A moment later, Logan heard it too. Voices, speaking in hushed tones, but carrying clearly in the thin mountain air. At least 2 people, maybe 3, moving along a path that would bring them directly toward their position. Logan grabbed Amara and pulled her behind a large boulder, motioning for Rex to take cover as well. The voices grew closer, and Logan was able to distinguish individual words in the local dialect. 2 men discussing guard rotations and complaining about the isolation of their assignment. They passed within 10 feet of Logan's hiding spot, close enough that he could have reached out and touched them. After the voices faded into the distance, Logan waited several more minutes before emerging from concealment. The encounter confirmed that the facility was indeed guarded and that security was tight enough to include roving patrols. It also suggested that the guards were becoming complacent, talking loudly enough to be heard from a considerable distance. "Regular patrol?" Logan asked Amara once they were moving again. "Every 2 hours during the day," she confirmed. "At night, they stay inside mostly, but they have cameras that watch the approaches. The blind spot is on the north side, where the old wall has collapsed." Logan nodded, filing away each piece of information in the tactical framework forming in his mind. The facility's security was thorough but not impenetrable. Like most defensive systems, it relied on the assumption that attackers would behave predictably and approach from obvious directions. A small team moving through the blind spot at the right time could potentially breach the perimeter undetected. They reached the edge of the ruins as the afternoon sun began its descent toward the western peaks. The shadows were growing longer, providing better concealment, but also indicating that their window of opportunity was shrinking. Logan estimated they had perhaps an hour before the men at the compound would begin wrapping up their meeting and returning to base. Logan studied the facility through his binoculars one more time, committing every detail to memory. The ruins were more extensive than they'd appeared from a distance, covering several acres of rocky ground. Some of the ancient structures had been reinforced with modern materials, creating a hybrid of historical architecture and contemporary function. The entrance Amara had described was exactly where she'd indicated, concealed behind a wall covered in carved reliefs. Logan could just make out the edges of a metal door frame, painted to match the surrounding stonework. It was a professional job, the kind of camouflage that would fool casual observers and most surveillance methods. "Guards?" Logan whispered, scanning for movement around the facility. "Two at the entrance, one in the tower," Amara replied, pointing to a partially reconstructed watchtower that offered commanding views of the approach routes. "Sometimes one walks around inside, checking the prisoners." 4 guards total, assuming Amara's count was accurate and current. Logan had faced worse odds, but never with the additional complication of extracting multiple prisoners from an underground facility while racing against a strict timeline. The tactical challenges were multiplying by the hour. Rex nudged Logan's leg, drawing attention to something the dog had detected. Following Rex's gaze, Logan spotted movement in the watchtower. A figure in dark clothing, carrying what appeared to be a rifle, scanning the surrounding terrain with mechanical precision. Professional behavior, suggesting military training rather than local militia. Logan made his decision. They would approach from the north, using the collapsed wall section to penetrate the perimeter undetected. Rex would remain with Amara as backup, while Logan dealt with the guards and located the prisoners. It wasn't a perfect plan, but it was workable within their constraints. "I need you to stay here with Rex," Logan told Amara, expecting resistance. Instead, the girl nodded solemnly. "I understand," she said. "You are the soldier. This is soldier work. But if something goes wrong, if you do not come back, I will take the dog and we will get help." Logan was touched by her pragmatic acceptance of the situation. Many adults would have argued or insisted on participating, but Amara understood her role and limitations. She would be an asset, not a liability. "If everything goes according to plan, we'll be back within 30 minutes, Logan said, though he knew from experience that plans rarely survived contact with reality. "If I'm not back in an hour, do exactly what you said. Get Rex to safety and find help." Logan began his approach to the facility, moving from cover to cover with the patience and precision that had kept him alive through 3 combat deployments. The collapsed wall section provided excellent concealment, just as Amara had promised. Someone had done their homework on this installation, studying its vulnerabilities and defensive blind spots. The electronic lock yielded to Amara's memorized code sequence on the first attempt, confirming Logan's growing respect for the girl's intelligence-gathering abilities. The heavy door swung open silently on well-maintained hinges, revealing a corridor that descended into artificial lighting. Modern construction disguised as ancient ruins, exactly as described. Logan descended the stairs slowly, weapon ready, senses alert for any indication of guard presence. The facility was larger than he'd expected, with multiple branching corridors disappearing into the mountain's interior. The air smelled of dampness and something else. Something organic and unpleasant that Logan recognized from previous encounters with improvised prisons. The first cell he encountered was empty, its heavy door standing open to reveal a small space furnished with a metal cot and basic sanitation facilities. Clean but Spartan, designed for function rather than comfort. The kind of accommodation provided to valuable prisoners who needed to be kept alive and healthy. The second cell contained an older man Logan didn't recognize, unconscious or sleeping deeply on the narrow cot. The prisoner appeared to be Middle Eastern, perhaps local, with graying hair and the weathered features of someone who'd spent years in harsh conditions. Logan made a mental note of the location, but continued his search for Marcus. He found his friend in the 4th cell, and the sight nearly brought Logan to his knees. Marcus Chen sat on the edge of his cot, staring at the wall with the hollow expression of someone who'd given up hope long ago. He'd lost weight, and his hair had grown long and unkempt, but he was unmistakably alive and aware. When Logan appeared in the cell doorway, Marcus looked up with eyes that took several seconds to focus, and even longer to register recognition. "Logan?" Marcus's voice was barely above a whisper, rusty from disuse and disbelief. "You're not real. I've been seeing things lately, conversations with people who aren't here." Logan's heart broke for his friend, understanding that Marcus's captivity had included psychological as well as physical torment. Isolation and sensory deprivation could drive even strong minds to the breaking point, creating hallucinations and delusions that became more real than reality itself. "I'm real, Marcus," Logan said, entering the cell and placing a hand on his friend's shoulder. The physical contact seemed to convince Marcus more than words could have. "I'm getting you out of here. All of you. Can you walk?" Marcus struggled to his feet, swaying slightly but maintaining his balance. Months of captivity had weakened him, but his core strength remained intact. "There are others," he said, his voice gaining clarity as the reality of rescue began to penetrate his disbelief. "At least 3 more, maybe 4. They move people around, but there are always others." Logan nodded, having expected as much from Amara's intelligence briefing. "I'll get them too, but we need to move fast. Can you handle a weapon?" Marcus's expression sharpened, and for a moment, Logan glimpsed the competent soldier his friend had been before his capture. "Give me something to fight with, and I'll show you what 5 years of planning revenge looks like." Logan handed Marcus his sidearm and spare ammunition, keeping his primary weapon for himself. Together, they began moving from cell to cell, gathering the other prisoners. The older Middle Eastern man Logan had seen earlier turned out to be a former government official who'd been kidnapped 6 months ago. 2 other Americans, contractors who'd been captured during a supply run, occupied cells at the far end of the corridor. All 4 prisoners were weak but mobile, and all expressed the same mixture of disbelief and desperate hope that Logan had seen in Marcus's eyes. They'd given up expecting rescue, accepting their captivity as permanent, and suddenly finding themselves offered freedom they'd stopped believing was possible. "How are we getting out of here?" Marcus asked as they gathered near the facility's entrance. "This place is designed to keep people in, not to let them out easily." Logan quickly explained their route and timeline, emphasizing the need for speed and stealth. The guard situation had apparently changed during his infiltration of the facility, because he'd encountered no resistance while freeing the prisoners. Either the guards were incredibly negligent, or something else was happening. As they prepared to leave the facility, Logan's radio suddenly crackled to life, startling everyone in the group. The jamming that had prevented communication earlier seemed to have been lifted, allowing signals through once again. "Pierce, this is base. Do you copy? We've been trying to reach you for the past hour." Logan keyed his microphone. "Bass, this is Pierce. I copy. I'm at the mountain facility with 5 prisoners, including Sergeant Marcus Chen, requesting immediate extraction." The silence that followed lasted so long that Logan thought the connection had been lost. When the response came, it carried a tone of confusion and concern that made Logan's stomach tighten. "Pierce, confirm your last transmission. Did you say you have Sergeant Chen?" "Confirmed," Logan replied. "Marcus Chen, reported missing 5 years ago, along with 4 other American prisoners. We need extraction now." "Pierce, that's impossible. Sergeant Chen was declared dead 3 years ago. You're either mistaken about the identity or you're being deceived somehow." Logan looked at Marcus, who had gone pale at hearing the radio exchange. His friend's expression carried a complexity of emotions that Logan couldn't immediately interpret. There was pain, anger, and something else that looked disturbingly like guilt. "Logan," Marcus said quietly, "there's something I need to tell you before we go any further. Something about why I was really captured, and why it took so long for anyone to find me." The weight of impending revelation settled over Logan like a suffocating blanket. He'd found his friend, accomplished the impossible, and rescued 4 other prisoners in the process. He should have been celebrating victory. Instead, he found himself standing in the entrance to an underground prison, surrounded by people whose stories he was only beginning to understand, waiting to learn truths that he suspected would fundamentally alter everything he thought he knew. "Tell me," Logan said, though part of him wanted to postpone this conversation indefinitely. Marcus glanced at the other prisoners, then back at Logan. "Not here. Not in front of them. But Logan, when we get out of here, when we're safe, you need to understand that my capture wasn't random. It wasn't bad luck or tactical error. It was planned, and not by the enemy." Before Logan could process the implications of that statement, Rex's urgent barking echoed from their position outside the facility. The warning was clear: immediate danger approaching. Their window of opportunity had closed, and whatever conversation needed to happen would have to wait. Logan led the group of prisoners toward the exit, his mind reeling from Marcus's cryptic revelation. If his friend's capture had been planned by friendly forces, it suggested a level of betrayal and conspiracy that Logan wasn't prepared to contemplate. But Rex's warning took precedence over personal revelations. First, they had to survive the next few minutes. They emerged from the facility to find Amara crouched beside Rex, both of them watching the approach road with obvious alarm. In the distance, Logan could see dust clouds kicked up by multiple vehicles, moving toward their location at high speed. The meeting at the compound had ended earlier than expected, and the facility's security force was returning. "How many vehicles?" Logan asked Amara, though he was already calculating defensive positions and escape routes. "4," she replied. "The same ones from before. They are moving fast, like they know something is wrong." Logan cursed silently. Their escape route would take them directly across the path of the approaching vehicles, making detection almost inevitable. The rescued prisoners were in no condition for extended cross-country travel, and standing to fight against superior numbers with limited ammunition was suicide. "There's another way," Marcus said, pointing toward a narrow trail that led higher into the mountains. "I've had 5 years to study this area, and I've seen maps that the guards thought I couldn't understand. That trail connects to an old mining road about 2 miles up. If we can reach it, we can work our way back to friendly territory." Logan evaluated the suggestion quickly. The trail Marcus indicated was steep and would be difficult for weakened prisoners to navigate, but it offered concealment and led away from the approaching vehicles. It was their best option under the circumstances. "Let's move," Logan decided. "Amara, you know these mountains better than any of us. Can you guide us to the mining road Marcus mentioned?" The girl nodded confidently. "I know that road. My grandfather worked those mines when I was very small. It is overgrown now, but still passable if you know where to look." They began their ascent as the sound of approaching vehicles grew louder. Logan brought up the rear, watching for pursuit while Rex ranged ahead with Amara, scouting the trail for obstacles or ambush sites. The rescued prisoners moved with determination born of desperation, understanding that this might be their only chance at freedom. 20 minutes into their climb, gunfire erupted from the facility below. Logan couldn't tell if the guards were shooting at shadows or had discovered actual evidence of the escape, but the message was clear. Their absence had been discovered, and pursuit would follow. "Keep moving," Logan urged the group, though everyone was already pushing themselves to their physical limits. The altitude and steep grade were taking their toll on prisoners who'd been weakened by months of captivity. But the alternative to continued movement was recapture or death. Amara proved to be an exceptional guide, finding paths through terrain that seemed impassable and somehow maintaining their pace despite the challenging conditions. She moved like someone who'd been born to these mountains, reading the landscape with an intuitive understanding that Logan envied. As they climbed higher, the pursuit sounds gradually faded behind them. Either the guards had given up the chase, or they'd taken a different route. Logan hoped for the former, but planned for the latter, maintaining vigilance and readiness for contact. The old mining road, when they finally reached it, was exactly as Marcus had described. Overgrown but still recognizable, it wound through the mountains in a series of switchbacks that would eventually lead them back towards civilization. More importantly, it was wide enough for the group to move together instead of single file, increasing their speed and reducing the risk of separation. As they walked, Marcus fell into step beside Logan, his expression heavy with the weight of secrets that had festered for 5 years. The other prisoners maintained a respectful distance, sensing that a private conversation was about to unfold between the two soldiers. "Logan, what I'm about to tell you is going to change how you see everything," Marcus began, his voice barely audible above the sound of their footsteps on loose gravel. "My capture wasn't an accident. It was orchestrated by people within our own command structure." Logan's blood turned to ice water in his veins. The implication was staggering, suggesting corruption and betrayal at levels that could compromise entire operations. "What are you talking about?" "There were people in our unit feeding information to enemy forces," Marcus continued, glancing around to ensure they weren't overheard. Not ideological converts, just soldiers who'd been bought. The recon mission that got me captured was designed to eliminate me because I'd started asking questions about suspicious patrol patterns and intelligence leaks. Logan's mind raced back through their shared deployment, searching for signs he might have missed. There had been operations that went wrong, ambushes that seemed too well prepared, and supply convoys that disappeared without trace. At the time, Logan had attributed these incidents to the general chaos and uncertainty of warfare. Now, Marcus was suggesting they'd been deliberate acts of sabotage. Who? Logan asked, though he dreaded hearing the answer. Captain Rodriguez was the primary contact, Marcus said, naming their former commanding officer. But there were others. At least 3 soldiers in our company, maybe more in adjacent units. They'd been selling patrol routes and operational plans for months before I stumbled onto the pattern. Logan remembered Rodriguez as a competent officer who'd seemed genuinely concerned about his soldiers' welfare. The idea that he'd been betraying them for money was almost impossible to accept. Yet Marcus had no reason to lie, especially not after 5 years of captivity. "How do you know all this?" Logan asked. "My captors weren't particularly careful about what they discussed in front of me," Marcus replied with bitter irony. "They assumed I would never have the opportunity to share what I learned. Over the years, I pieced together the entire network. Names, methods, payment schedules, everything." Logan felt sick. If Marcus was correct, their entire tour had been compromised from within. Every mission they'd completed, every risk they'd taken, had been conducted under the watchful eyes of traitors who were actively working to get them killed. "The notebook," Logan said suddenly, understanding dawning. "That's why you kept such detailed records. You were building a case." Marcus nodded grimly. "I had suspicions before the mission that got me captured, but no proof. I was planning to take my concerns to higher command when I got back. Instead, I walked into a trap that had been specifically designed to silence me permanently." The group paused at a bend in the road where Amara had spotted something that concerned her. While the others rested, Logan processed the implications of Marcus's revelation. If there had been a conspiracy within their unit, it might still be active. The people responsible for Marcus's capture could still be in positions of authority, still capable of covering up their crimes. "Why didn't they just kill you?" Logan asked. "Why keep you alive for 5 years?" "Insurance," Marcus replied. "Dead martyrs can be dangerous if people start asking the right questions. But a missing soldier who might have deserted or been turned provides a different narrative. Plus, I had information they needed about other soldiers who might have been getting suspicious." Logan's admiration for his friend's resilience grew even deeper. Marcus had endured 5 years of captivity while protecting information that could have gotten other soldiers killed. He'd chosen prolonged suffering over betraying his brothers in arms, maintaining his integrity even when it would have been easier to break. Amara returned from her scouting position with news that chilled everyone's blood. "There are vehicles on the road ahead," she reported. 3 trucks, moving slowly, like they are searching for something. Logan's worst fears were confirmed. The facility's security force hadn't given up the pursuit. They'd simply taken a more efficient route, using their knowledge of the terrain to intercept the escapees rather than chase them through difficult mountain terrain. "How far ahead?" Logan asked, already formulating contingency plans. "Maybe 1 kilometer, Amara replied. "They will reach this position in 10 minutes, maybe less." Logan evaluated their options quickly. The mining road offered no cover for a group of 6 people plus a dog. The surrounding terrain was too steep and rocky for the weakened prisoners to navigate safely. Standing and fighting was possible, but the odds were heavily stacked against them. "There's a mine entrance about half a kilometer back," one of the contractor prisoners said. "I noticed it when we passed. Might be big enough for all of us to hide until they pass." It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was better than being caught in the open. Logan made the decision to retreat, hoping they could reach the mine before the search vehicles spotted them. They moved as quickly as the terrain and the prisoners' condition allowed. But it soon became apparent that they weren't going to make it. The sound of approaching engines grew steadily louder, and the road behind them offered no concealment from observation. "Into the rocks," Logan ordered, pointing toward a cluster of boulders that provided the only available cover. It wasn't much, but it was better than being caught completely exposed on the road. They scrambled into hiding just as the first vehicle rounded the bend. Logan watched through his binoculars as 3 pickup trucks loaded with armed men approached their position. The searchers were being systematic, stopping frequently to examine the ground for signs of passage. Rex pressed against Logan's leg, sensing the tension and ready to respond to whatever commands might be necessary. The dog's training included attack protocols, and Logan knew that Rex would fight to protect the group if violence became unavoidable. But 6 people and a dog against 12 or more armed opponents was a battle they couldn't win. The lead vehicle stopped directly adjacent to their hiding position. Logan held his breath as armed men dismounted and began examining the road surface for tracks. Their hiding spot was adequate against casual observation, but it wouldn't withstand serious scrutiny. One of the searchers called out something in the local dialect, pointing toward the boulder cluster where Logan's group was concealed. Logan's hand moved to his weapon, preparing for the fight that seemed inevitable. Then, Amara did something that surprised everyone. She stood up from behind her rock and walked calmly toward the armed men, her hands visible and empty, speaking rapidly in their language with the confidence of someone who belonged in this landscape. Logan's finger tightened on his trigger, ready to provide covering fire if the girl's gambit failed. But instead of raising their weapons, the searchers listened to whatever story Amara was telling them. After several minutes of conversation, the men returned to their vehicles and continued down the road. Amara waited until the trucks had disappeared around the next bend before returning to the group. Her expression was carefully neutral, but Logan could see satisfaction in her eyes. "What did you tell them?" Logan asked, though he suspected he might not want to hear the answer. "I told them I was looking for my goats that had wandered away from the village," Amara replied with a slight smile. "I said I had seen foreign soldiers earlier, but they were moving toward the valley, not up into the mountains. I offered to show them the way for money." Logan stared at this remarkable child who had just saved all their lives with quick thinking and natural acting ability. She'd understood the tactical situation instantly and provided a solution that none of the trained soldiers had considered. "Did they believe you?" Marcus asked, clearly as impressed as Logan was. "Village girls are invisible to men like that," Amara replied, with wisdom beyond her years. "They see what they expect to see. A poor child looking for lost animals is not worth their attention unless she can help them find more valuable prey." The group resumed their movement along the mining road, but the encounter had demonstrated how precarious their situation remained. They were still deep in hostile territory, traveling with weakened prisoners and being actively pursued by forces that had superior numbers and equipment. As the afternoon wore on, Logan found himself walking beside different members of their small band, learning their stories and assessing their capabilities. The government official, whose name was Hassan, had been captured during a diplomatic mission that had been compromised by the same network Marcus had discovered. The 2 contractors, Johnson and Williams, had been taken during what they now realized had been a deliberately planned ambush of their supply convoy. All of them had pieces of the same puzzle, fragments of information that painted a picture of systematic betrayal within the American military presence in the region. The scope of the conspiracy was larger than Logan had initially imagined, potentially involving dozens of personnel across multiple units and command levels. "This is bigger than just our company," Logan said to Marcus during a brief rest stop. "If what everyone is saying is true, the corruption goes all the way up the chain of command." Marcus nodded grimly. "That's why they kept us alive. We represent evidence of their crimes, but evidence they could control and manipulate. Dead prisoners tell no tales, but living witnesses can be discredited or silenced in other ways." Logan was beginning to understand the full scope of what they were up against. Rescuing the prisoners was only the first step. Getting them to safety and ensuring their testimony reached trustworthy authorities would be far more challenging than the actual escape. As the sun began to set, painting the mountains in shades of gold and crimson, Amara led them to an abandoned mining shelter where they could rest for the night. The structure was partially collapsed, but still provided protection from the elements and concealment from aerial observation. Logan established a watch rotation and tried to contact base again, but his radio remained silent. Either the jamming was still in effect, or they were simply too far from friendly forces to maintain communication. In either case, they were on their own until they could reach a more secure location. As the others settled in for what rest they could manage, Logan found himself staring out at the darkening landscape, considering their next moves. The mining road would eventually lead them back to areas under government control, but that journey could take days through terrain that offered numerous opportunities for ambush. Marcus joined him at the shelter's entrance, both men keeping watch while the others slept. "There's something else," Marcus said quietly. "Something I haven't told you about why they really kept me alive all this time." Logan turned to face his friend, reading the tension in Marcus's posture. After everything that had been revealed, Logan wasn't sure he was prepared for additional complications. But he needed to know everything if he was going to get them all to safety. "They wanted me to make contact with you," Marcus continued. "They knew that if anyone came looking for me, it would be you. They planned to use me as bait to draw you into a trap where they could eliminate both of us simultaneously." The revelation hit Logan like a physical blow. His rescue mission hadn't been a success at all. It had been part of an elaborate plan to neutralize two soldiers who posed a threat to the conspiracy. Every step of their escape had potentially been anticipated and planned for by their enemies. "Then why did you come with me?" Logan asked. "If you knew this was a trap, why didn't you warn me?" "Because I also knew it was our only chance," Marcus replied. "They were planning to move me again soon, to a facility where rescue would be impossible. And because I trusted that you were smart enough and skilled enough to turn their trap back on them." Logan considered this, evaluating their situation with the new information. If Marcus was correct, then their pursuers weren't just searching randomly. They were following a predetermined plan designed to channel the escapees toward a specific location where they could be eliminated with minimal risk of exposure. "Where?" Logan asked. "Where are they planning to spring this trap?" Marcus pointed toward the valley visible in the distance, where lights twinkled like fallen stars against the darkness. "The village at the end of this mining road. It looks like safety, like civilization, but half the population works for the same people who held us prisoner. Anyone seeking help there would be walking into a carefully prepared killing ground." Logan felt the trap's jaws closing around them, understanding now why their pursuit had been so persistent, yet seemingly ineffective. The searchers hadn't been trying to catch them on the mountain roads. They'd been herding them toward a predetermined destination where the real ambush waited. "How do we get around it?" Logan asked, though he was already beginning to formulate alternative plans. "We don't go around," Marcus said with a smile that reminded Logan of the confident soldier his friend had been before his capture. "We go through, but we do it on our terms, not theirs." Marcus pulled out a piece of paper that had been hidden in his boot, unfolding it to reveal a hand-drawn map of the village and surrounding area. 5 years of captivity gave me time to memorize every detail of this region. I know where the ambush points are located, where the escape routes lead, and most importantly, where the conspirators keep their key communications equipment. Logan studied the map, impressed once again by his friend's methodical preparation and attention to detail. Marcus had spent his captivity gathering intelligence and planning for exactly this situation, turning his imprisonment into an extended reconnaissance mission. "The communications center," Logan said, understanding dawning. "If we can reach it and broadcast what we know to the right people, we turn from hunted into hunters," Marcus finished. "Instead of being eliminated to protect the conspiracy, we become the instrument of its exposure and destruction." Logan looked back at their sleeping companions, understanding that their escape from the mountain prison had been just the beginning of a much larger and more dangerous mission. They weren't just trying to reach safety anymore. They were attempting to dismantle a network of corruption that had cost lives and compromised national security. "The others," Logan said. "Do they understand what we're really up against?" "They know enough," Marcus replied. "Hassan has been building his own case against the conspiracy from the diplomatic side. Johnson and Williams have information about supply route compromises that cost their friends lives. We're not just prisoners anymore, Logan. We're witnesses, and our testimony could bring down the entire network." Logan nodded, accepting the weight of responsibility that came with this knowledge. They'd moved beyond a simple rescue mission into something that resembled a covert operation, complete with intelligence gathering, strategic planning, and the potential for significant political ramifications. Rex stirred from where he'd been sleeping, lifting his head to listen to something only he could detect. Logan followed the dog's attention, hearing the distant sound of helicopters moving through the night sky. The aircraft were flying without lights, visible only as dark shapes against the stars, but their presence suggested that the search for the escapees had escalated significantly. Military or contractor? Logan whispered, though he suspected both answers were equally problematic. Does it matter? Marcus replied. Either way, they're not here to help us. Logan woke the others quietly, explaining the situation and the need for immediate movement. The helicopters were searching in a grid pattern that would eventually cover their current position, making concealment impossible and escape urgent. Amara took point again, leading them through terrain that became increasingly treacherous in the darkness. Logan marveled at the girl's ability to navigate by starlight and memory, finding paths that seemed impossible even with night vision equipment. As they descended toward the valley, Logan could see the village Marcus had warned him about, its lights appearing deceptively welcoming after hours of travel through hostile wilderness. Understanding that those lights represented danger rather than salvation required a fundamental shift in perspective that challenged every instinct honed by years of military training. There, Marcus said, pointing toward a cluster of buildings on the village's outskirts. The building with the radio antenna, that's our target. Logan studied the structure through his binoculars, noting the security measures and defensive positioning. It was clearly more than a simple communications facility, with multiple armed guards and electronic surveillance equipment visible even in the darkness. Getting in won't be the problem, Logan observed. Getting out with a message transmitted will be the challenge. We don't all need to get out, Marcus said quietly. As long as the message gets through, the mission succeeds. Logan turned to stare at his friend, understanding the implication. Marcus was prepared to sacrifice himself to ensure that their intelligence reached friendly forces, completing the mission he'd started 5 years ago when he'd first discovered the conspiracy. That's not happening, Logan said firmly. We all go in, and we all come out. No heroic sacrifices, no dramatic last stands. We do this professionally, and we do it together. Marcus smiled, and for the first time since their reunion, Logan saw genuine hope in his friend's eyes. I was counting on you to say that. I've got a plan that gets everyone out alive, but it requires perfect timing and a little bit of luck. As Marcus explained his strategy, Logan found himself once again impressed by his friend's tactical thinking and attention to detail. The plan was complex and risky, but it was also achievable with the resources they had available. More importantly, it offered a real chance of success without requiring anyone to make the ultimate sacrifice. They spent the remaining hours before dawn in careful preparation, each person understanding their role and the timing required for success. Logan distributed ammunition and equipment, ensuring that everyone was as ready as possible for what was to come. As the first hints of light appeared on the eastern horizon, Logan took one last look at his small band of unlikely allies. A battle-tested soldier and his loyal canine companion, a friend returned from the dead, 3 other prisoners freed from years of captivity, and a village girl who had risked everything to help strangers she'd never met. It wasn't the kind of team Logan would have chosen for a mission of this magnitude, but it was the team he had. And as he'd learned repeatedly throughout his military career, success often depended less on perfect resources than on the determination and ingenuity of the people involved. Ready? Logan asked, though he knew the question was largely rhetorical. Ready or not, the time for action had arrived. The assault on the communications facility began with Amara, creating a distraction on the opposite side of the village, drawing guards away from their primary target. Logan and Marcus approached the building from the north, while the other prisoners established overwatch positions that would provide cover and fire if things went badly. Rex remained with Logan, ready to provide early warning of approaching threats or to engage hostiles if the situation deteriorated into open combat. The dog's training and loyalty had already saved their lives multiple times during this mission, and Logan trusted Rex's instincts more than his own tactical planning. The building's security was exactly as Marcus had predicted, with guards positioned at predictable locations and surveillance equipment focused on obvious approach routes. Logan and Marcus bypassed the main defenses by entering through a maintenance access that Marcus had identified during his imprisonment. The interior of the facility was a maze of electronic equipment and communication arrays, far more sophisticated than Logan had expected for such a remote location. This wasn't just a regional communications hub, it was a major intelligence collection and distribution center, serving the entire conspiracy network. Marcus moved directly to a specific piece of equipment, his familiarity with the layout confirming that he'd spent considerable time studying this facility during his captivity. Within minutes, he'd accessed the communication systems and begun transmitting a data package that contained 5 years' worth of collected intelligence about the conspiracy. Logan maintained security while Marcus worked, monitoring the approaches and watching for signs that their intrusion had been detected. The transmission would take several minutes to complete, during which they were completely vulnerable to discovery and counterattack. Halfway through the transmission process, Rex alerted to movement outside the building. Logan could see armed figures moving through the village streets, converging on their location with the coordination that suggested their presence had been detected. How much longer? Logan asked Marcus, who was frantically working to complete the data transfer before they were forced to retreat. 2 minutes, Marcus replied. Maybe less if the connection holds. Logan evaluated their tactical situation, calculating the time available before hostile forces reached their position. 2 minutes was longer than they had, which meant they needed to buy time through other means. Logan activated his radio, hoping that proximity to the powerful communication equipment would allow his signal to reach friendly forces. Any station. This is Sergeant Logan Pierce with urgent intelligence about prisoner rescue and conspiracy within UW's forces. Requesting immediate support at coordinates. The response came immediately, cutting through static with crystal clarity. Pierce, this is Colonel Matthews, Theater Intelligence Command. We've been monitoring your situation and have assets moving to your location. Hold position and prepare for extraction. Logan felt a surge of relief that was immediately tempered by suspicion. The response had come too quickly, with too much specific knowledge about their situation. Either Theater Intelligence had been tracking them more closely than seemed possible, or this was another element of the trap Marcus had warned him about. Marcus, Logan said urgently. We need to go now. Something's wrong with that response. Marcus looked up from the communication equipment, his face pale with understanding. The extraction team, if that's what it really is, won't be coming to rescue us. They'll be coming to silence us permanently. Logan made the decision that would define the remainder of their mission. Instead of waiting for the promised extraction, they would complete their transmission and then execute their own escape plan. Trust had become a luxury they couldn't afford when the corruption reached levels they were only beginning to understand. The transmission completed just as hostile forces reached the building's perimeter. Logan and Marcus grabbed the equipment they needed to prove their intelligence was legitimate, then initiated the facility's destruction protocols that Marcus had discovered during his imprisonment. The explosion that followed eliminated the conspiracy's primary communication hub, while providing cover for their escape. Logan led the group through predetermined withdrawal routes, using the confusion and destruction to mask their movement through the village. As they reached the extraction point where Amara and the other prisoners were waiting, Logan could see helicopters approaching from multiple directions. Some were clearly hostile, but others bore markings that suggested legitimate military forces responding to their emergency broadcasts. The next few minutes would determine whether their mission ended in success or catastrophe, whether the intelligence they'd gathered would expose the conspiracy or die with them in a remote Afghan village. Logan checked his weapon one last time and looked at his companions, understanding that whatever happened next, they'd accomplish something significant together. Rex pressed against Logan's leg, sensing the tension and ready for whatever action might be required. The dog had been with Logan through the entire mission, providing warnings, support, and companionship when hope seemed lost. Whatever the outcome, Logan knew that Rex had earned a place among the heroes of this story. The first helicopter to land bore the markings of Theater Intelligence Command, but Logan held his position rather than immediately approaching. Marcus had taught him to question everything, especially when salvation appeared too convenient or timely. 3 figures emerged from the aircraft, one of whom Logan recognized as Colonel Matthews from previous briefings. The colonel approached with his hands visible and empty, making no threatening gestures, but maintaining the alert posture of someone prepared for trouble. Sergeant Pierce, Colonel Matthews called out. I need you and your people to come with us immediately. The situation is more complex than you understand, and there are hostile forces converging on this location. Logan stepped forward but kept his weapon ready, Rex at his side, and the rest of his team in defensive positions behind him. Sir, with respect, we need verification of your identity and confirmation that you're here to help rather than silence us. Colonel Matthews nodded approvingly. Smart thinking, Sergeant. Given what you've discovered, paranoia is justified. Colonel Sarah Matthews, Theater Intelligence Command. Authorization code Delta 77 Alpha 9. Your transmission was received and confirmed. The conspiracy you've uncovered reaches higher than you imagine, but it doesn't reach me or my team. Logan processed the authorization code, which matched protocols he'd been briefed on, but had never expected to use. Either this was legitimate, or the conspiracy was so sophisticated that it included the compromise of high-level security codes. Marcus stepped up beside Logan, studying Colonel Matthews with the intensity of someone who'd spent 5 years learning to identify threats and deceptions. Colonel, what specific intelligence did our transmission contain? If you received it, you should be able to confirm details. Colonel Matthews smiled grimly. Your transmission included evidence of weapons sales, patrol route compromises, prisoner transfers to non-military facilities, and financial records showing payments to at least 15 personnel across 6 different units. The scope suggests coordination at the battalion level or higher, with implications for regional security that, quote, extend beyond Afghanistan. Logan relaxed slightly, recognizing that this level of detail could only have come from Marcus's carefully compiled intelligence. But he remained cautious, understanding that trust would have to be earned incrementally, rather than granted immediately. Sir, what about our safety? Logan asked. If the conspiracy reaches as high as you suggest, how do we know we won't be eliminated to protect the people involved? Because, Colonel Matthews replied, you're no longer the only ones who know. Your transmission was received by multiple agencies simultaneously, and copies of your intelligence are already being analyzed by investigators who exist outside the normal command structure. The conspiracy you've exposed is finished, but the people involved will be desperate to cover their tracks. As if summoned by her words, the sound of additional helicopters filled the air. Logan counted at least 4 aircraft approaching from different directions, some bearing military markings, and others flying in the civilian configuration favored by contractors and intelligence agencies. Which ones are friendly? Logan asked, understanding that the next few minutes would be critical to their survival. Colonel Matthews keyed her radio, speaking rapidly in coded language that Logan couldn't follow. After receiving a response, she turned back to Logan with an expression that mixed relief with concern. 2 of the incoming aircraft are ours, she said. The others belong to people who want to ensure you never testify about what you've discovered. We need to move now, before they establish a cordon around this area. Logan made the decision to trust Colonel Matthews, largely because the alternatives were significantly worse. He signaled his team to move toward the helicopter, maintaining security protocols but accepting the risk inherent in boarding an aircraft with people whose loyalties were still unconfirmed. As they approached the helicopter, Logan noticed that Amara had become extremely quiet, her usual confidence replaced by obvious fear. The girl who had navigated them through mountains and negotiated with armed search parties was suddenly reluctant to board an American military aircraft. What's wrong? Logan asked her, recognizing that Amara's instincts had been accurate throughout their mission. The village, she said quietly, pointing back toward the settlement they'd just escaped. Look at the village. Logan turned to follow her gaze and felt his heart sink. The village was burning, with multiple structures engulfed in flames and smoke rising into the morning sky. The destruction was too extensive and too coordinated to be accidental, suggesting that someone had decided to eliminate all evidence of what had transpired there. Colonel, Logan said urgently, the village is being destroyed. There could be civilians in those buildings. Colonel Matthews followed his gaze and cursed softly. The conspiracy's cleanup protocol, she said grimly. They're eliminating witnesses and evidence, regardless of collateral damage. This confirms how desperate they've become. Logan understood that they were witnessing the final act of a conspiracy that was willing to commit mass murder to protect itself. The people responsible weren't just traitors. They were war criminals, operating without any moral constraints whatsoever. The helicopter lifted off as hostile aircraft moved to intercept them, beginning an aerial chase through the Afghan mountains that tested the skills of both pilots and the capabilities of their aircraft. Logan strapped himself in and prepared for combat, understanding that their escape was far from guaranteed. During the flight, Colonel Matthews briefed Logan on the broader implications of their intelligence. The conspiracy had been operating for at least 7 years, compromising operations across multiple countries and resulting in the deaths of dozens of American personnel. The financial trail led to accounts containing millions of dollars, suggesting systematic corruption at levels that threatened national security. Marcus sat quietly during the briefing, occasionally confirming details but mostly staring out at the landscape below. Logan recognized the expression, having seen it in other soldiers who'd endured prolonged captivity. Marcus was free physically, but the psychological scars would take much longer to heal. Rex remained alert throughout the flight, occasionally lifting his head to assess threats, but generally maintaining the calm demeanor that made him such an effective partner. The dog had performed magnificently throughout the mission, and Logan made a mental note to ensure Rex received appropriate recognition for his service. As they approached friendly territory, Logan began to contemplate the challenges that lay ahead. Testifying about the conspiracy would require reliving every detail of their mission, exposing classified information, and potentially placing targets on their backs for years to come. The people they'd exposed wouldn't simply accept defeat and fade away quietly. Colonel Matthews seemed to read his thoughts. "There will be protection for all of you," she said. "New identities if necessary, relocation to secure facilities, whatever it takes to keep you safe while the investigation proceeds." Logan looked around at his small band of survivors, understanding that they'd all sacrificed their old lives to expose the truth. Marcus would never be able to return to the military career that had been stolen from him. The other prisoners would need years of rehabilitation and support. Even Amara, despite her youth and resilience, would need help adjusting to whatever life awaited her outside the mountains that had been her home. The helicopter touched down at a secure facility that Logan didn't recognize, surrounded by enough security personnel to repel a small army. As they disembarked, Logan realized that their mission was far from over. Rescuing the prisoners had been just the beginning of a much larger operation to dismantle the conspiracy and bring its members to justice. Over the following weeks, Logan and his team provided detailed testimony to investigators from multiple agencies, each session revealing new aspects of the conspiracy's reach and sophistication. The financial evidence alone was sufficient to convict dozens of personnel, while the operational intelligence exposed compromises that had cost countless lives. Marcus proved to be an extraordinary witness, his methodical documentation and precise memory providing investigators with leads they'd never imagined possible. His 5 years of captivity had been transformed into the most comprehensive intelligence collection operation in recent military history. The other prisoners contributed their own pieces of the puzzle, each perspective adding depth and context to the overall picture. Hassan's diplomatic insights revealed international ramifications that extended far beyond military corruption, while Johnson and Williams provided detailed information about supply chain compromises that had funded the entire operation. Amara, despite her youth, proved to be one of the most valuable witnesses, her detailed knowledge of the region and its inhabitants providing investigators with a ground-level perspective they couldn't have obtained through any other means. Her courage in helping strangers had exposed one of the largest military conspiracies in American history. Rex, ever loyal, remained at Logan's side throughout the entire process, providing emotional support and maintaining the partnership that had carried them through their most challenging mission. The dog's performance during the operation earned him commendations from the highest levels of military command, though Logan suspected Rex was more interested in the extra treats than the official recognition. As the investigation proceeded, Logan learned that their mission had been even more significant than he'd realized. The conspiracy they'd exposed had been responsible for compromising operations across 3 countries, resulting in the deaths of over 40 American personnel and the loss of millions of dollars in equipment and supplies. The trials that followed were complex and lengthy, with defendants including officers up to the rank of colonel and civilian contractors at the highest levels of the defense industry. Logan testified at 17 different proceedings, each one requiring him to relive the events of that extraordinary mission. Marcus struggled more with the public attention and legal proceedings, his years of captivity having left him with an understandable preference for privacy and solitude. Logan made sure his friend received the support and treatment he needed, understanding that healing from such trauma would be a lifelong process. The other prisoners eventually returned to their families and civilian careers, though all remained in contact with Logan and each other. They'd shared an experience that bonded them permanently, creating relationships that would endure for the rest of their lives. Amara proved to be the most adaptable of all the survivors, embracing the educational opportunities that were provided to her while maintaining connections to her cultural heritage. Logan arranged for her to be educated in the United States while ensuring she could visit her homeland whenever she chose. Years later, as Logan reflected on the mission that had changed all their lives, he understood that they'd accomplished something far more significant than a simple prisoner rescue. They'd exposed corruption that threatened the integrity of the entire military structure, saved countless future lives by eliminating ongoing compromises, and demonstrated the power of ordinary people to confront extraordinary evil. The girl who had whispered, "You finally came from the forest," had been waiting not just for rescue, but for justice. In finding Marcus, Logan had discovered a conspiracy that reached the highest levels of military command. In exposing that conspiracy, they'd all found a purpose that transcended their individual circumstances. Rex, now officially retired from active duty, but still Logan's constant companion, seemed to understand the significance of what they'd accomplished together. The dog had been instrumental in every phase of the mission, from detecting the initial threat to providing security during their escape and testimony. Logan often wondered what would have happened if he'd ignored that whisper from the forest, if he'd followed standard protocol and waited for backup instead of trusting his instincts and Rex's alerts. The conspiracy might have continued for years longer, claiming more lives and compromising more operations. Instead, a soldier and his canine partner had heard a girl's desperate whisper and responded with courage that changed everything. In saving Marcus and exposing the conspiracy, they'd honored the oath that every soldier swears to protect and defend, not just against foreign enemies, but against all threats to the values they'd pledged to uphold. The mission had begun with a routine patrol and evolved into one of the most significant counterintelligence operations in recent military history. It had cost them their anonymity, their previous lives, and their sense of security, but it had also given them something invaluable: the knowledge that when faced with ultimate tests of character and courage, they had not been found wanting. In the end, Logan understood that heroism wasn't about grand gestures or dramatic sacrifices. It was about ordinary people making extraordinary choices when circumstances demanded them, about hearing whispers from the forest and having the courage to respond, about trusting partnerships forged in adversity and maintaining faith in principles, even when those principles were under attack. Marcus had survived 5 years of captivity by maintaining hope that someone would eventually come for him. Logan had honored that hope by refusing to abandon the search, even when official channels had declared his friend dead. Together, they'd exposed evil, saved lives, and proved that loyalty and determination could overcome even the most sophisticated conspiracies. As Logan watched Rex chase butterflies in the yard of their new home, he smiled at the simple pleasure of seeing his partner happy and free. They'd been through hell together and emerged stronger for the experience, their bond deepened by shared trials and mutual trust. The girl's whisper had changed everything, just as she'd promised it would. But the changes had been worth the price, because they'd led to justice, truth, and the kind of victory that could only be achieved by people willing to risk everything for something greater than themselves. Logan Pierce and Rex had answered a call for help from an unexpected source and discovered that sometimes the most important missions begin with the smallest voices. In saving others, they'd found redemption for themselves and proof that even in the darkest circumstances, courage and loyalty could light the way home.